This is Krolak with MMT Academy. Ever wonder why price suddenly spikes and liquidates thousands of traders in seconds? Today we're going to cover the liquidation or liquidity heat map for the Market Monkey terminal. And we're going to go over how to set up, interpret, and utilize this indicator with real-world examples. So first off, what is liquidity? Liquidity is a bit of a catch-all term in the crypto space, but when we refer to it, we're explicitly talking about areas or price points in the market where traders are predicted to be liquidated or stopped out, and in what quantities. Let's set up the indicator. If you click Indicators tab in the top left and go to M&T Official, you can type in LIC or scroll down to the bottom and you'll be able to apply the liquidation heat map to your terminal chart. And it will look something like this. So let's go over the settings for it. To access the settings, you just click the cog next to the indicator label. At the top you have the color map. This is preferential, but you can change the visual representation of the heat map. Some good options I would suggest you try out are Viridis, Plasma, Emberglow, and MMT Liquidation are some of my favorites, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to stick with Emberglow. The opacity slider, if you drag it to the left, it makes the indicator more transparent, to the right more opaque. This can be useful because, say you drag it to the left and make it more transparent, you can turn on the order book heat map at the same time, which allows you to cross-reference where limit liquidity is on the order books and where liquidity is on the liquidation heat map. So you can cross-reference them, and MMT will seamlessly combine these sort of indicators together. Node line spacing, if I zoom in and toggle it on and off, you can see how it will remove or turn on the black lines in between nodes of liquidity, and this can make it easier to visually identify liquidity nodes. I typically keep this off, but it's preferential again. Extend heat map or extend levels. If you turn this on, it will take the current liquidity and extend it into the future to make it more visually identifiable. The downside to this indicator is it does obfuscate the right side of your terminal, which you might have other indicators here. So that's the trade-off. Hide heat map is kind of self-explanatory. If you turn it on, it will hide the heat map. Typically, you're going to combine this if you use it with show profile, which will now give you a liquidity profile. So this will illustrate to you to the right side of your terminal where current liquidity lies and in what quantities. Again, brighter colors typically denote stronger nodes of liquidity, and also longer denote stronger nodes of liquidity. And the profile width lets you change the width of the liquidity profile. I use 0.2 typically, but this is preferential again. The row height will change the height of the individual nodes of liquidity. You can use this to make it more granular. If you go lower, it will become more granular. If you make it higher, it becomes less granular, which is not going to be as exact, but it can make it a bit easier to read. I'll set it for 6 for now. The leverages or enabled levels for the indicator is one of the more important parts of the indicator, and we'll cover this quickly. It allows you to toggle on the differing leverages or predicted leverages of traders and where they're going to get liquidated. So if I turn on 100x, for instance, it's plotting the points in the market where it's estimating where traders who use 100x leverage are likely to get liquidated. And obviously, they're going to be a lot closer to price most of the time. And also not as important, because typically larger or lower thresholds, of liquidity will tend to have more volume transacted. So most of the time you're going to have these mainly turned on. For lower time frame, you can see if I turn on the 5x liquidity, it doesn't really affect the heat map too much on a lower time frame like 15 minutes, because that sort of liquidity tends to be much further away from price. So you can see if I toggle the 5x, it's much further down below. So if you're on a lower time frame, you might have these sorts of things turned off, these lower thresholds. And then when you go to a higher time frame, you can turn them back on again. But now I'll just have these ones turned on. The toggle quick settings, if you enable this, it allows you to quickly toggle the different leverage thresholds on the fly. This is preferential. I tend to prefer the main menu, so I have this off. Regarding the advanced settings, you've got ticks per row And if you enable this, you can manually change the groupings of liquidity in terms of size. So right now it's on about 600. If I double it, you can see how it gets much thicker. And you can customize this to better view different time frames or different locations of liquidity. And then you have the intensity or the color scale. And you'll notice that if you drag it to the left, it gets more intense, and further to the right is less intense. And this can be useful to more easily see liquidity depending on where and when you're looking at it. Now that we've got the indicator set up, we can talk a bit more about how it works and how to utilize it. So generally speaking, in the financial markets, traders tend to place their stop losses, if they're on the bull side, below lows, and they tend to place their bear stop losses above the highs. So down here, for instance, you can see during this period of the market, we had a lot of poor lows, and this gave traders a lot of opportunity to enter longs, and most of the time, they tend to situate their bull stop losses below the lows. So what is a bull stop? It's a forced market order to sell when they get stopped out. So when a bull gets stopped out, they are selling at market, and you can see how price ran into this liquidity, these forced selling orders at market, and then price cascaded down very quickly and then got built back up. So how can you utilize that? Well, say you're on the short side, you could be looking to target that liquidity, because that's what the market typically does. It builds liquidity and then it targets it. So you could be more patient with short ideas, for instance, and you could situate your buy limits within this forced selling liquidity. And that's what big traders do. So you'll notice that if I turn on the order book heat map, down here you had a bunch of buy limits. And these savvy larger traders are situating their buy limits within that forced selling liquidity. So you can kind of imagine weaker bulls are fed through the wood chipper in order to fill the buy limits of smarter bulls, because buys transact into sells and market orders transact into limits. So you've got market selling coming down from bulls getting stopped out or liquidated to fill the buy limits of the smarter traders. And this happens very often. The market will generate liquidity. Like here on the upside, you can see that we had these descending highs, and we know that bears typically place their stop losses above the descending highs. And this is what the indicator predicts and visualizes. So this liquidity up here, these are points where the indicator is estimating that the market will stop out bears and force them to buy, which you can see what happened. Price came up, stopped out a lot of bears, and it formed a domino effect or like a cascade, because you can imagine as a bear gets stopped out, he's forced to buy, and it transacts into the next stop loss, and that's how price can shoot and take out liquidity very quickly until those forced players are exhausted. And then oftentimes it will reverse. So combining with other tools, for instance, you can see this very large entity on the sell limit side. He's situated his sell limits inside of this forced buying liquidity from bears getting stopped out, right? Which allowed him to very easily and cost efficiently fill his positions by force feeding weaker traders to get stopped out into his opposing limit orders. And you can be utilizing this. So if you're looking to take longs, you could be waiting for this large node of liquidations to be run. If you're on the short side and liquidity was building up below the lows, you might be more patient with your, or more optimistic with your short targets. So you could be situating your buy limits within this forced selling at market liquidity, just like these players down here are doing. And then once that liquidity is run, you could be looking to take a reversal entry on the long side, because that's what typically happens. It can happen on a smaller time frame or larger, but price will often eventually take out pockets of liquidity, and typically you want to be taking profit inside of that liquidity if you're already positioned. And then once the liquidity is run, you can consider taking a reversal entry. Down here, for instance, we had these weak lows. The market took out those bulls who got stopped out, so they were forced to sell. Eventually they got exhausted into the buy limits, Big spike in volume as you'd expect because a lot of players are getting stopped out. And then eventually they get exhausted and the opposing side steps in. So that's how price can like spike down and up very quickly, or the inverse, and you can be utilizing that. So we discussed you could be placing your TPs for your short side within the bull liquidity, and then once that's run out, you could consider taking a long. Inversely, what you could be doing with your stop losses, if you're aware of this liquidity down here, it wouldn't really make sense to put your stop loss down here because the market typically gravitates towards liquidity. You do not want to be getting stopped out with other players. So what you can do instead is just not be looking for longs here if you know there's a ton of liquidity above, or if you're on the short side, say from up here or maybe higher, you could be more patient and optimistic with your short side and then look to target via limit orders the liquidity down below as these players are forced to sell that market as they get wiped out. And then once they're wiped out, yeah, look for potentially a reversal entry, and then you could place your stop below. So typically when it comes to placing your stop loss and utilizing it with liquidity heat maps, you want to not place your stop in liquidity nodes like this, or like this, or like even up here or here, for instance. You want to place your stop losses in liquidity voids, so the darker areas typically on the chart where there's less stop loss liquidity, because it makes it more likely that the market, or less likely that the market's going to gravitate towards your stop losses. So those are the 3 golden rules when it comes to using the heat map, I would say. Look to take profit where other people take pain. Once they've taken their pain, consider taking reversal entry using order flow and other tools that we'll get into more later to confirm your trades, and keep your stop losses away from where other people place their stop losses. Wait for them to get stopped out before you enter, and then place your stop loss a bit below. Alternatively, place your stop losses in the liquidity voids where there's a lack of liquidity. This has been Krolic with MMT Academy. If anything in this video is unclear, just ask any time inside the Academy and we'll get back to you directly. Thank you for watching.